All right, hey, morning, everyone. Morning. Had breakfast? We can do it better. Good morning. Yes, nice. All right, my name is Ravikanth. I'm going to talk about the operations validation for infrastructure as code, right? Why operations validation is important, and we'll see some demos around how do you use that along with DAC and other aspects within the infrastructure as code, right? So a few things about me. I'm a principal engineer at Dell. I work on the virtualization and cloud solutions. If you have heard about CPS standard or used it, anyone? Oh, nice. Yeah, my team does all that. I lead the automation aspects on the Dell side of CPS standard. I'm also MVP, supposed to be Powershell, now it's CDM. And I'm a founder and editor of Powershell magazine. Anyone read that? Nice. I'm also a small-time author. I wrote this book called Powershell Desired State Configuration Revealed. Show of hands. Not bad. A few more coming. I'm also updating this desired state configuration for the second edition, which will have a lot of WM5, cloud, developer-related stuff within the book. It's going to be big. All right. All right. So like I said, this is the agenda that we have for today. First thing is why operations validation, right? We're going to talk about Pester a little bit, but not the unit testing with Pester. We're talking about operations testing here, right? And we'll also talk about operations validation framework, which is one of the open source small projects by Microsoft. It's there on GitHub. I'll show you a few demos along with that. But not necessarily, my demos are not really about that. Towards the end, I'll show you the framework, how to use that framework itself, and what some of the things that we can actually change within that space to make it more elaborate and comprehensive. Now, talking about infrastructure as code, the first thing that comes to my mind talking about this is the Phoenix project. Anyone read that book? That's good. Now, Phoenix project, for those who are interested in DevOps and other aspects within that scope, Phoenix project is a great book. It talks about how the crappy IT processes can damage your business, the overall business value, how it can reduce, not having collaboration between your development teams and operation teams, how it can actually damage your business value, and so on. And of course, customer satisfaction at the end of the day, right? The book does a great job, but it's still not the real-world stuff, okay? Have you heard about a real-world Phoenix project debacle that happened? Anyone know about the Knight Capital Group? Oh, yeah. Yeah? Anyone worked in that? No? All right. So for those who don't know about Knight Capital Group, they were a company, in 2012 this happened. So the company lost almost $460 million in a span of 45 minutes. Okay, that's like $10 million a minute, which is very, very bad, right? And this is what really happened. So on August 1st, 2012, they started pushing some code previous day to some of the servers. There's supposed to be an updated automated trading algorithm, which will basically help customers get better deals on the when they're doing the trading and stuff like that. Now, what happened during that process was one of the servers did not get the update. Okay, out of 8 servers that they had, they deployed the update only on 7 servers. The last server did not get the update. And whenever the customer orders hit that particular 8th server, it multiplied the orders, customer orders, okay, because of a bug that they had in the older release. And that resulted in millions of orders going out of the system. And by the time Knight realized that mistake, it was already like $460 million of damage, right? The company was later, in 2013, I think they got acquired by a Gitco LLC. But that's a pretty bad example of not doing the right things in the IT operations and the development space, right? Now, this actually says a few things, right? This is something some of us might have seen in the operations space, in the IT infrastructure space. I worked in the IT infrastructure management for almost like beginning of my career was that, right? I started managing customers' data centers, wherein I was part of the team. I was the only member of the team at some point in time. I've worked with IT managers who had the God mode access to the entire IT system. I worked with developers who had the similar access. So when they had to go change a few things, they would go directly into the registry, change a few things, or go edit a configuration file on a Linux system, done. Now, when I have to rebuild the system, I don't know what they did. I have no clue about what had changed and how the system is running. All I know is what application is running. I don't know what is enabling that application to run behind the scenes. Right? Those operational aspects is what really cause some of these damages. Right? Now, when the technicians at night deployed this whole patch the previous day, they missed one of the servers, and there was no other technician or no other process actually validating that patch update. They did not validate what's happening behind the scenes and how the application is working after the patch update. So that's the operational aspects that we're talking about. Once you're deploying this configuration, it's not just about desired state anymore. It's about how that desired state is really impacting your functionality of your infrastructure. So that is what we call operations validation. Right? So before we go there, let's talk a bit about the infrastructure as code. Right? Must have heard about this many times. Yes? Yeah? So whenever you read something about DevOps, definitely infrastructure as code figures out there. Right? Because infrastructure as code plays a major role within the DevOps ecosystem or the practices itself, because the automation that you need at the infrastructure level, whether you're deploying application or you're deploying the infrastructure itself, that is enabled using infrastructure as code. Now, infrastructure as code is not a tool set. It's a set of practices, again, like DevOps. Right? So what we have first is a reusable automation. So reusable automation basically talks about any automation that you can parameterize and reuse in a consistent manner and repeat it multiple times. That's what we call it reusable automation. Now, this can be enabled by just a plain simple PowerShell script or any other programming language, or it can be done using configuration management tools like DSE, Puppet, Chef. Right? I can have some of my configuration scripts do the repeatable and reusable automation for me. Okay? Once I have that, I also want to put it in source control so that I can track versions. I can go back to any version that was. If I push an update today, like what happened in Night Capital's case, if I push an update today and it doesn't work, I want to roll it back to a later version. I should be able to do that. So I put it in a source control and track my version changes and so on. And of course, I do my unit testing also, not about the configuration of the system, but unit testing about your resource modules or the PowerShell automation that you have written, right? Definitely, Pester plays a major role within the unit testing framework there, at least for PowerShell, right? Now, you do your unit testing of your PowerShell resource modules or DSE resource modules, etc. Now, you do a continuous delivery and a deployment of that into your different stages of your environment, like it could be dev, QA, staging, production, and so on. Now, once you push all that, you're good. Continuous deployment is done. You have all your code deployed into your production environment. Now you think everything is in desired state. Now, being in desired state does not necessarily mean everything is working as expected. Right? Being in desired state basically tells you that a specific resource is configured as you want it to be configured. But does not mean necessarily that that resource is actually helping an application do its job. Right? So that's where the operations and integration validation comes into picture. Right? Integration validation, once again, tests for the desired state. These are the terms, can be confusing. Integration testing can also be used to test the functionality of an application or infrastructure, but it's ideal to divide those two things into different tests itself, right? Integration testing, basically you check at the desired state, after you completed your continuous deployment, when you run the integration test, you just make sure whatever you configured through the configuration script, is it in the desired state or not? There are some rules. If you have used configuration data, like a .psdn file or a hash table that you want to use with a DSE configuration script, you have to ensure that the same configuration data is used in integration testing as well as operations testing. You should not hard code any values. You just take the same configuration data that you supply to the configuration script and use it with integration and other tests that you want to do within the infrastructure. Yeah.
Yeah, often I find people get confused about the difference between desired state configuration, operation, validation. And so the clearest example I like to give is just because it's configured doesn't mean it works.
Yes.
And so imagine that you had an Ethernet cable that was unplugged. All the systems are perfectly configured, but they don't operate. Operation, validation, testing is about testing to make sure that they actually operate.
Exactly. I mean, that's a great example, right? I was able to talk about the CPS standard deployments that we did, a few of them, right? So DSC is used quite a bit in CPS standard, right? So the deployment is automated. We kind of deploy the whole thing in like less than 3 hours. Now, we have great deployment guides that we have written, but unfortunately, not everyone reads the deployment guide, right? I mean, everyone is an expert in what we do. So I don't necessarily read a deployment guide to just click a few buttons in the UI, no, right? But the deployment guides contain instructions that really matter. They talk about the prerequisites. Now, we have had situations where the customer side, everything is configured as per customer input, okay? Customer provided the input, the VLAN IDs, what IP ranges have to be used, and so on. Now, once everything is deployed, I start my actual hybrid cloud deployment. Now, what happens is I find that my network is not reachable. I can't reach my Active Directory. I can't reach my storage nodes, or my storage nodes cannot talk to my Active Directory. Now, that is an effect. I mean, DSC configured everything as per the input I provided, but it's not the right thing. It configured everything to be at the desired state, but now, after the fact, after that is configured, now when I started doing the automation that actually builds the entire hybrid cloud system, everything failed because although you're in desired state, it's not the right state. It's the desired state as per the input you provided, but that's not the right thing that should have been configured on that. If I ran, sorry, yeah.
No problem. What is the difference between that kind of operations validation and classical monitoring, like use psconf, for example, or Nages, using synthetic transactions that actually prove operations is working? So you could offload that job to a classical monitoring system, or am I wrong?
Well, that's the operations aspect of it, right? Once you have everything deployed. Now, what we're basically talking here about is once I started deployment, once I complete the deployment, let's say using DSC, I want to ensure at that point in time that application is behaving as it is expected to behave, right? I'll show you some examples. And this is something that the idea for the demos actually came from what we did within CPS and what we are actually trying to include more in the future. So a customer or a delivery person from my team should be able to go run this operational validation suite and find out if CPS standard is configured as expected and is working as expected, right? So that's the goal that we have there. But to that point, integration and validation, they're two different things. Again, desired state does not mean that your application is working fine. You got to have your integration validation tests definitely written after that. And coming to this, validations, I mean, unit testing, integration, operations validation, everything can be done using Pester. And we will do everything using Pester, right? Now, unit testing is different. You can mock objects. You're testing your code, right? You mock different functions that you have. But when it comes to integration and operations validation, you should not mock anything. You should test the real infrastructure. Okay, that doesn't mean you're changing the state, but you're actually looking at if the application that you just deployed is working as expected or not. So for that, you should not mock anything, right? So let's say if you have if I have to give an example, if you have a Powershell module that configures pull server. Now within that module, you want to test whether the pull server is configured or not. You can actually mock the URLs and do things, the response from the URLs. But when you want to do integration testing and operations testing, you should not mock that. You should really hit a real pull server URL, get the information from that. Right? Any questions so far? All right. We just talked about this. So, all right, that's demo time. Now, this is the scenario I have. Server 2016, how many of you know switch embedded teaming? Used it? OK. All right, so this is a scenario which basically creates a switch embedded team with 2 network adapters. And I have a management operating system, which is Hyper-V, having 3 VM network adapters. And each of those VM network adapters get configured with a specific VLAN ID and IP address, which is relevant for that particular subnet. So that's the configuration I have. Let's see. I can't see my screen. It'll be a little bit slow. I'm accessing my lab back in Bangalore. So, because I want to show the real stuff here. I mean, not something that is. So this is the configuration I have for my demo purpose. The C Hyper-V module is on Powershell gallery. It's different from X Hyper-V. I have a set resource. I have a network adapter VLAN, network adapter resources, and you can configure the bandwidth, weight on your network adapters, etc. So you can get that module for doing all this. Now, what essentially we're doing here is I have 2 network adapters. I'm creating a set team here. And I'm setting the VLAN on that particular adapter, which is in the management operating system. So this becomes my management network adapter. I assign an IP address to that. And similarly, I create a cluster and live migration adapters. Okay? It's a bit lengthy, but you have all that configuration that I showed in the picture here.
Sorry, Rev. Short question. What are you using this ID for?
I'm sorry?
What are you using this ID for in your configuration?
Sorry, I didn't catch it.
You're using an ID in your configuration. What for?
So.
Can you repeat the question? Because we only record what you say.
Oh, sure. So I'm using ID here. This is what you're referring to?
Yes.
OK. So DSC resources always need a key property, right? OK, so if you actually see the VM network adapter, the C network adapter resource, you can have in the either connected to a VM or in the host OS, you can have the network adapter with the same name. They track it internally using a GUID. So when I first released that resource, that's what we hit into. People wanted to connect multiple network adapters with the same name, but DSC was not letting do that because you have the duplicate keys within the document. So that's where I introduced that ID property, which basically just takes a random GUID. So, make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So what I'm doing here is OK. Don't look at this. This is my password. So. All right. So I have the configuration data. This is wrong. I'm not going to apply this because it's already there. Right. So this is already created. I have node data, which is as a separate PSD1 file. So this is the node data. So whatever is common across all my Hyper-V hosts, I've listed that here. And what is specific to my the host that I'm configuring, it's there in the other node name block, or the hash table, right? So what essentially happens is when I run this configuration, the set team gets configured. All the adapters get added to the virtual switch or the management operating system. All the IP addresses get configured. And then the host gets added to my Active Directory domain. Okay, that's where I'm changing the name. The host name property within that is used there. So this whole thing is already configured. So just to show you that I'm not faking anything here, I'll show you that whole stuff which is configured. Right, I have a set team. These are the network adapters. I'm connected to the AD domain. Right. Now, what should be the desired state configuration test for this? Sorry. All right. Now, the integration test for this would be something that will check if Hyper-V role is installed or not, because that's what I'm doing. The first thing that happens within the configuration script is I'm enabling Hyper-V role on this computer, and then creating a set team, and then adding management adapters, and then adding the VLAN IDs and so on. Everything for that actually is coming from a configuration data PSD1 file I have. So within my integration test, that's what I'm checking here. Oh, and by the way, this is a pretty neat trick. How many of you know that there is an argument transformation attribute? 2? All right. Let me show you that. So when you have a configuration, do you know how you can pass the configuration object to it, right? It's a little bit slow, but let me do this. I just loaded the configuration into memory, so I can use it like a function now. It's still doing something. Okay. So if you see this configuration data, there's a parameter here, which is a hash table, right? But if you actually provide it a .psd1 file, it still takes that parameter. It still takes this argument. So the thing that happens there is, in v4, you have this parameter transformation, the argument to configuration data transformation attribute, which internally takes your .psd1 file and then spits out a hash table or an object for you to use, right? So that's pretty neat. So I've also told you one thing when I started with the integration and operation test, you should use the same configuration data. So right now, if you see here, this is the same configuration data that I'm using for my configuration enact process, applying the desired configuration, as well as integration and validation tests. Okay. Now this small function basically gets me that object so that I can use within my Pester tests. Right. And these are all the Pester tests. Should not be really alien because a lot of Powershell, Hyper-V commandlets there. But how many of you have done Pester here? All right. June has a session this afternoon, which is about test-driven development. That'll be a pretty good session for you to attend if you don't know Pester yet.
That line will fail. There's an A missing, a configuration that instead of data. So you fix it.
It will work because that's the only attribute, so it'll work. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I'll fix it. Thank you. Yeah. So let's run this thing and see. Hopefully, it should work. So invoke Pester is the commandlet that we use. You can specify -script and give it a specific Pester test script, or any of the scripts that are there within that folder. They're all run automatically for you if there are .test.ps1 files within that folder. Now, this is what I really verified here, right? I've verified that my VM switch is a set team. I've got the adapters checked. For each adapter, I'm also checking whether the VLAN is matching or not. I can actually extend this a little bit more because I have the IP addresses set. I have other things configured on that, like bandwidth weight and all that. I can actually verify those settings as well to make sure this is really in the desired state that I want it to be. Now, how does my operations validation test would look? Any guesses on what I would have within that operations validation here? I've configured everything now as I want it. I have the IP addresses, I have VLANs, everything set. I'm connected to the domain. So what can I check from an operations point of view? Yeah?
Can do a live migration of a machine.
Wow, that's too hi-fi, extremes of operations testing. Yeah, but can be done, yes, yeah. All right, so what I have here, I've divided that into simple and comprehensive tests, okay? Let's first look at the simple tests. Once again, I'm using the same configuration data. I'm making sure my Hyper-V module is installed on that box. This is one of the simple operational tests. I'm not saying that is the test that you should do. This basically indicates that the Hyper-V role is installed. I'm not checking if Hyper-V role is installed. I want to check if my Hyper-V commandlets are installed or not along with it. Right? Second, I'm trying to load the module and see. Once again, this is a simple test, nothing to test the actual functionality of Hyper-V itself or the infrastructure itself. Third one, I have a host connectivity check. Since I'm connected to the domain, I should be able to resolve my own name with the DNS server, and that's what is done here. Once again, you can extend this again. The simple test can be extended in terms of pinging the gateway, right, or pinging any of the DNS servers that you have or other infrastructure servers that you have. You can extend that whole thing again. Let's try and run this. That's supposed to work, yes. And I have more comprehensive tests within the other test script where I actually create a virtual machine. So there's a support function I created which injects an IP into the virtual machine on Hyper-V. The same configuration data. And I'm adding some more properties to the configuration data that I'm collecting so that I can use it in the Pester test. I have a VM name, so I always try to create a virtual machine with the name test VM. I assign it an IP address, right? And you can see that here. So this is where I'm doing more comprehensive tests in terms of host connectivity. For example, I'm also checking if gateway is reachable or not. This can be a simple test as well. If a VM can be created, I just create a VM and see if that can be really powered on, right? I can start a VM. Now, I configure a VLAN ID for that particular virtual machine. Since I'm not doing this through any of the DSC resources or anything, I just go set a VLAN ID, which is in the same subnet as the management operating system. And then I check the IP address, whether I can inject an IP address into that. Now you have the WMI interfaces to go do that, starting Windows Server 2012. You can inject an IP address into a virtual machine using the guest integration services. So that's what the function this particular test does. And from the host OS, I'm checking if that VM can be reached or not. By default, within the template that I'm using, I've enabled Powershell, firewall rules. So I'll be able to ping that using test connection and reach to that. So I'm testing that. Again, I can extend this to an extent where checking if my virtual machine can be added to the domain or not. I can use PowerShell direct and then go invoke commands within the virtual machine and check if virtual machine is able to connect to the outside world or not and register with the domain controller and so on. All those operational tests can be performed within this scope again. Right? It's all how you want to extend this whole thing. Right? There's no limit there. But once again, one of the things that you should not do is change the state of any of the desired state resources. Whatever resources you configured through desired state, you should not change the state of those resources within your operation tests. So just remember that fact, but you validate only how those resources are functioning. Right? This will take a bit of time because it has to create a virtual machine.
By the way, I like the way you're setting this up, that there are these hierarchies of operational validation tests.
Yes.
And some of them you can even, be, like one of the things you might want to do is to go and disable one of the physical NICs and make sure you still have connectivity.
Exactly, yeah.
That actually has a side effect, right? So you don't want to always be doing that.
Yeah.
That can have an operational
Yeah.
application. But if you've discovered a problem, then doing that level of detailed diagnostics is worth doing.
Exactly, yeah. All right, that's quick actually. So we created a VM, the VLAN ID, IP address can be injected, IP address can be reached. Once again, I'm not faking any of this. I commented a line in my script which does not delete the virtual machine. So whatever IP address I assign should be here. Right. So Yes.
Referring to Jeffrey's side effect, if you're injecting an IP, that is doing something. There's a new IP on that machine and it's available in the network.
That's correct.
Could it be that is breaking something?
Well, it could be a DHCP IP as well. Once I put the VLAN ID, it could be a DHCP IP as well. I don't have that infrastructure in my lab, so I'm not using it. But to your point, I'm not really changing the state that I configured on the host. I'm only creating a virtual machine. But to your point, yes, there'll be a new network device on the within the infrastructure now. So, sorry, go ahead.
As you said, the generic point's correct. When you write these tests, you want to be careful of side effects.
Yes.
And that, by the way, that's one of the reasons why containers are so exciting. Because a container is an opportunity to run something in an environment that then just gets thrown away completely when you're done. So you got to figure out how to use them, but that's one of the great advantages of a container. So often what we find at Microsoft is we end up chasing a bunch of test failures that turned out to be a previous test had a side effect and contaminated the environment.
That's correct.
And the next effect, it screwed up the next test. So if you're able to run the test in an environment that then you throw away, and each of the tests runs in a clean environment, you have more stable tests.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple of other tests that I actually started writing, but I could not make it to this because of a lot of other bugs, is actually validating the entire cluster itself. Now I joined a cluster within the Hyper-V infrastructure. Now can I kind of shut down one of the nodes and see if virtual machines move from one to Jeffrey's point? Can I see virtual machines moving from one node to another node, right? This is an extreme operations validation. You may not want to do it all the time. So that's where you have separation between the simple test that you want to perform every time you kind of configure one of these systems, and you have comprehensive tests that you perform either in a diagnostics mode or you have a completely new infrastructure, you want to validate that infrastructure, you use those comprehensive tests for that. You can simply invoke Pester scripts this way, containing all your tests completely, right? But there's also operations validation framework. I'll come to that in a bit. Let's just go back to the slides and see what we have. All right, so what I did with this converged network switch configuration I have, I packaged my configuration fragment, which actually configures the set team and the VLAN adapters and so on, which is completely parameterized. You can reuse it as many times you want. With the test that I have, okay, I have the integration test for it. I have the operations validation test for it. I'm calling it an infrastructure blueprint. Now, that's the infrastructure blueprint that you should be able to take it and use it as is, right? Once again, you got to have changed those parameters in the node configuration. And the way I started packaging this whole thing is this way, right? I have a config fragment, which is in .config.ps1. I have the node data.ps1, which has the configuration data that goes with it. And I have the tests, diagnostics, comprehensive, simple tests. And I have the integration tests, again, listed with it. Now, when I give this configuration to someone who wants to use it, they can just run the configuration, update the node data, run the configuration, and run the test within that blueprint. And it basically tells you whether it's in desired state or not, and it tells you whether it's operational or not. Right? So this is up on GitHub. I think this is a link. I'm going to add more such blueprints. Feel free to contribute. It'll be like, the ARM templates that we have, right? It can be a simple ARM template or a configuration file along with tests packaged with it, right? So that's the kind of infrastructure as code to some extent, at least. You use GitHub source control. You have the tests. You have reusable automation in terms of DSC. That's infrastructure as code for you.
Got a question. You are right now imprinting the configuration to a file. I mean, you have like node data that has some kind of parameters with the value set itself.
Yep.
Is it possible to use the JSON file as the parameter values and the node data as the parameters names? So I define the names in the node data, all the sets, and then have a bunch of JSON files for each of the hosts, or one JSON as a comprehensive for all the hosts.
Yeah.
And input the data from the JSON to the node data.
Yeah, DSC itself doesn't have that today, but you can certainly write something which transforms your JSON into a configuration data and then pushes it using DSC. DSC doesn't itself has that.
I
Yeah.
know, but what I mean is that your no data BSD file is having all the names
Yeah.
and values. of
Yes.
the names.
Yes. Yes.
I would like to use only names.
You can separate it. Yes. Definitely yes. Right. So there's a framework that's on GitHub, a Microsoft repository, operations validation framework. It takes a slightly separate approach where you have a module. They expect everything to be packaged as a module. And then you have the diagnostics folder underneath that. That basically means your module has a .psd file to be discoverable. And you have simple and comprehensive tests within that. Right? So the way it works is, so you have this operations module. You have a couple of commandlets in that. Get operation validation and invoke operation validation within that. Yeah. So pretty simple. When you do get operation validation, it'll actually go through your module path, find out which all modules have that diagnostics folder, and then list out all the simple and comprehensive tests within that. So we do this. I think I have only a couple of examples there. So it should list 4 or 5 tests. So this is what you get. Now you can also filter by the type of test, simple or comprehensive. And then you can run the operation validation by providing the module name, right? In this case, it's an example that comes with the package, example.windows search. It, of course, fails on my system. I don't have indexing enabled for this, right? So if you see the output is different from, you had something, Jeffrey? Success. Yes. So if you see the output is different, they're invoking Pester tests, but the output is different here because they package the output in a different manner so that you can read it properly, right? If you look at the output from a Pester test, it has all this, the green, red lines based on the result. It looks like this. Instead of that, they kind of format the same output into test name and what passed and what failed, right? You can, of course, use a test file path. For example, I have the same simple test script that I used in the previous demo. I used that with invoke operation validation, and it should do the same job, but a different output. I mean, the output is formatted differently for me, right? Now, one of the things with this module, even the infrastructure blueprints that I just put on GitHub, is that we don't have the support for remotely running the tests. Okay. Now, for me, as a solution architect, it's not just about one system anymore. It's about a rack. I want to validate if that rack is functional or not, it's operational or not, because I'm configuring the entire rack at once as a single unit or a single entity of my infrastructure. So I should be able to validate the entire rack at the same time. That's missing from both what I'm trying to do and what operations validation does today. But there is a way to remotely invoke Pester tests. Heard about something called remotely? Yeah. Yeah. So remotely actually is a wrapper on top of Pester, or you can call it that way, right? So they take a Pester test, they run it remotely. The way it is done today is not really secure because you need to put a machines.csv file within the module folder, put all the machines and the username and password into that CSV file, right? So, but I'll show you how it looks. So I've taken the same script that I have for the simple validation. I've added some remote tests to it. I'm not going to show you the machine.csv, but all I have to do is add this keyword remotely, and then enclose that in a script block. Whatever I have here, just add remotely before it and put it in a script block. It should run remotely. Yes?
Is it the same kind of concept of if you just wrap that script block in invoke command?
remotely does something different because you have to get the streams. You have to get the output streams back to Pester and make sure it passes through the pipeline and gets the result validated. So they're doing more than what just invoke command does. Yeah.
I'd just like to add as well, there's in the chef and puppet world, there's Test Kitchen, which is a framework for spinning up ephemeral environments
Yes.
when testing. There's also a Pester driver that sits inside Kitchen, so that you can run Pester tests as part of that test run. That might be of interest to people who sort of want to do something remotely as well.
Sure. Yeah, I've not worked on Test Kitchen. To his point, Test Kitchen already has a Pester drive, and it can run tests remotely and so on. That's definitely one of the options. Yes.
One of the key benefits of Test Kitchen is to check out your code against lots of different environments. So you say, I wrote this code, will it work on 2008, 2012, and 2012 R2, and it's just fantastic at this. Operational validation tests tend to be more about how do I test the validation of a particular instance.
Yeah, I mean, and
It's a great tool.
And it is great tool, and yeah, it's focused on the integration side of what we've been talking about today. And but yeah, but it does isolate the fact that, you know, if you create a machine, you know, in the operations validation world, you're potentially creating configuration data in a real world environment that you then, when you destroy your environment, you potentially leave stuff behind. So you have to be responsible about cleaning up.
Exactly. So if you see in my scripts here in the comprehensive test, I actually clean up. I clean up the virtual machines that I create and so on. I did not show that because I want to show you VM running. There. Right. I just lost it. What? I just lost the connection, I think. I'm over a VPN, so not sure what happened.
Could offer you a hotspot.
Sorry?
I could offer you a hotspot.
Internet, yeah. This is fine. I think it's just my VPN, which is giving away. But anyway, I just have one demo which I wanted to show you there, which is running the test remotely. So, any questions?
Any limitations in sense of operating system I'm running on? So this works on 2008 R2 and upwards, or
PowerShell 5. Pester doesn't require PowerShell 5, but some of the DSC requires PowerShell 4.
okay.
So that's there on 2008 R2. You should be able to use it.
Great.
So if I use other environments that do not that heavily rely on DSC, like say I provision, to AWS, which also has a PowerShell integration.
Yes.
So I still could use those modules even if I didn't use DSC that heavily.
Yes. So the integration tests are independent of DSC. They just use the configuration data that you supply to the DSC configuration script, but they're not completely independent of it.
So it just, as long as I stick to that configuration data scheme, I'm fine.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
That's actually a question I had posted on the original operational validation framework project on GitHub. And to me, it's still not clear, like, what advantages the operational validation framework offers me in comparison to vanilla Pester tests. Like, I don't really see any benefit yet, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, just...
Jeffrey, you want?
Yeah, so here's the thing, it's a really simple layer on top of Pester. It's about 500 lines of code, and it's focused in on sort of two things. One is providing some guidance about how to deliver your Pester test in a way that everybody can share and then find, instead of saying, well, it's somewhere on the file system, and if you find it, here's how you run it. Say, oh, here's how they are, and then you got to find them all, and then some structure around simple and diagnostics, and then also a different way of outputting the results. That's it. But other than that, it's Pester.
Yeah. The best part of Pester is basically you can convert that to the output can be a unit XML. So once you have that, putting into some other system or some other script and creating visualizations or creating better reports is not a big deal, right?
And just to go to that, the whole point symphony, right? One guy by himself, kind of thin music. But when there are more and more people joining, and you start bringing those down, like when you were taking a look at the test, I was thinking, oh, you missed this thing and this thing and this thing.
Yes.
So if I wrote a module for operational validation test for that, then you could just incorporate it. It's easy to find. It's easy to incorporate and run.
Yeah.
So it's all about that very thin layer of code on top of Pester to facilitate collaboration and sharing.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, can I throw something in here, Robbie?
Sure.
We were talking about this at breakfast this morning, and several of us are writing tests that can be used independent of the module, so on any module, right, to test a module or to test a configuration, to test an infrastructure. And what we hope to get together is a library of these tests that people can come and choose. The tests are tested, right, so that you don't get into that recursive thing where you have to keep testing your tests. You can rely on the tests that are in the library because they're tested. And people can come and get them, which sort of automates part of their testing.
Yes.
With OVF and Pester becoming bigger and bigger, I mean, it's only a question for everyone's thoughts, but the naming extension PS1, like test.ps1, I mean, what are your thoughts on that being like the static naming standard, or is there something that you know of that might be, are we moving towards a Pester-based naming extension for files, or?
You have the persons sitting there. Yeah, I mean, test.ps1 completely makes sense to me. I mean, it clearly tells me that I have my Pester test within that. And the way we started using within OVF on my work that I'm doing, simple tells me that these are the simple tests that won't really damage your or do any diagnostics on your infrastructure. Comprehensive is something that runs probably for an hour and tests everything within your infrastructure. So.
Language extension is a common unit testing naming in other languages as well, so it sort of falls in line with Python and other things.
All right, any other questions? If good? So to summarize, that's not bad, right? Testing in production is not bad. I mean, as long as it is operational testing, not unit testing or not any other testing. As long as it is operations testing, testing in production is a must. So don't ignore operations validation, which is the critical thing within the ecosystem of DevOps or infrastructure as code. Don't just ignore that. That's all I had, guys. Thank you.